What is up, my RedRebel Nation family? It is your boy Deuces. I'm back once again. Guys, we are back with Kiley Rodni Autopsy Accidental Drowning Part 2. As we know, this woman is a doctor, and she has, well, pertained in autopsies, and, well, she is actually, schooled or enough, or a professional enough to, well, give us a 100% reaction to, well, Kiley Rodni's autopsy, and that's what she has provided for us. Anyways, guys, without further ado, love yourself, like yourself, be nothing but yourself, like, subscribe to the channel, it's highly appreciated. Without further ado, let's get right into the video.
Asked in the comment section and clarify a little bit about the fentanyl testing that may have been done, although not well documented on the published papers that we were able to receive through FOIA. I think maybe first I'll address the fentanyl issue. And that is as follows. Yes, an expanded toxicology tissue toxicology was ordered by the medical examiner and sent to the lab. While expanded included testing for fentanyl, there was really no statement made precisely by the medical examiner regarding the fentanyl issue. You can make a presumption by calling the lab. Of course, through HIPAA, they would never reveal any specifics of Kiley's or any other patient's findings. However, because communication is so very paramount in medicine as well as medico-legal procedures, having to sort of two-step, extrapolate back, call a lab, that is not streamlined, it's clunky, and it really should not have to be done as part of understanding a toxicology report, especially in light of the fact that this was or is still a criminal investigation. The Truckee, Placer County, Nevada County areas really are almost epicenters in the national epidemic of fentanyl overdosing and the unfortunate lacing of fentanyl and the inadvertent overdosing. So we know that that is an important aspect, especially in this case. Also, folks may or may not be aware of the fact that a young man, approximately 20 years old, was arrested within a week or so of Kiley's having gone missing and charged with murder because he had supplied a fentanyl to a 15-year-old young lady, and she died. So this investigation has many layers, and that is why.
So why didn't they test for the fentanyl? Why didn't they test for shrooms? Why didn't they test for LSD? Why didn't they test for any of this stuff? This absolutely makes no sense, just like the whole case made no sense. From her car being in the water, from fire cam footage catching a car going in the water at the same time, 3 or 4 other cars leaving at the same time. It makes no sense. A party being right next door, basically, so we was told, quote, a beautiful, luscious Mexican party. And then, so this all does not make sense to me. So you go to tell me that all these people came and searched for Kiley Rodni, which we know they did because they used up the money, and that's what they said. But where's the videos? Oh, well, speaking in third person, oh, well, they was told not to, the kids was told not to come forward with video or with pictures because, well, we wanted to do the investigation correctly. Where are they at now? No pictures just still came up. The only pictures that ever came up was people wearing, well, bracelets that looked like Kiley Rodni's bracelet. And It makes absolutely no sense. Even when AWP come up out of the water, he said it looked like there was foul play the way she was actually positioned. And it went on to say that the rib cage with the indention from the lungs didn't even look right at that point neither when it comes to a drowning. Anyways, guys, let's get right into the video.
It is incumbent upon the agencies involved to keep communication open amongst themselves and also to the public, because where there's not good communication or sloppiness in documentation, it only serves to fuel
Sloppiness is exactly right in this case. Anyways, let's continue.
Unfortunately, to fuel conspiracy theories or to promote the sense of lack of confidence by the public vis-a-vis law enforcement authorities, including the coroner and medical examiner. So prior to diving into the specifics of why I do not think that drowning necessarily could be the reason for Kiley's demise, I think it's very important to remember what I said from the previous part 1, and that.
So this doctor does not believe that Kiley Rodni actually died from drowning. So we have a doctor actually coming forward and saying, hey, this does not look right. So that goes to show everybody else on this planet that thinks, well, the whole thing didn't look right. We're not the only ones that, well, that doesn't think it looked right. We have a doctor coming forward and saying everything was done basically, well, it wasn't done the correct way and has not been finished. Let's continue.
That is that on autopsy, drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning that it's quite difficult. Sorry to cough. It is quite difficult to come up with that diagnosis because there is not one, what we call in medicine, pathognomonic finding. There is not one identifying, this is it, eureka moment for drowning. Indeed, it is the diagnosis of accidental drowning is what we call a diagnosis of exclusion, and it is a result of what we say in medicine, a constellation, like stars, a constellation of factors. Not only post-mortem physical findings, and I'm going to go through that probably in part 3, but it is a constellation of.
Oh, wow. So we are going to get a part 3 of this as well. Anyways, let's continue.
Of macroscopic, what you can see with your eyes on autopsy, microscopic findings, as well as from the moment of finding a deceased body submerged in water, those communications from the various authorities. All of those investigations have to be brought together in order for the medical examiner to make the presumptive diagnosis of accidental drowning or drowning. There are a couple of articles that I'm going to actually link later this evening to this episode in case you want to take a deeper dive into some scholarly articles around drowning in general, around the difference between freshwater drowning and seawater, saltwater drowning, and how decomposition occurs differently in those different types of waters. Also, how the body reacts, how the weight, for instance, of the lungs in a drowning is different from with respect to freshwater or lake drowning and ocean or saltwater drowning. I am going to go through some specifics and walk folks through that, but I think that's going to have to wait till part 3. Okay. Now, before we dive in, and that'll be in part 3, no pun intended, before we dive in to the autopsy, looking at the constellation of findings that could or did point to drowning or did not, let's talk about a couple of basic concepts. One I'm sure you all have heard of is the chain of custody. That's very different from the chain of command. As we all know, when we go to work, chain of command, you're an employee, let's say, and then you have your manager, a supervisor, in my case, a chief medical officer, a CEO, director of operations, etc. So there's sort of what I call the food chain in terms of the chain of command. And that likewise goes for law enforcement or any other type of agency. Here we're talking about the chain of custody. So, for example, when, I'll give a small example, when we have to do a drug screen for investigative purposes, that patient will go to a specific lab where an individual double and triple checks their name, date of birth, etc. And that individual either has to go into the restroom and observe the person urinating or voiding, or the person has to go to a specific restroom where the toilet water is of a certain color so that it can't be, you can't sort of cheat and come up with a negative drug screen, etc. Let's say the person has been observed. They have urinated into a cup. They give that urine cup to the nurse or the technician, and then, for example, in the emergency room, that technician signs, and then it has to go to the police officer, and then they sign, and it follows what we call a chain of custody, so that we know that from the moment that identified individual has voided or urinated, they have followed that specimen through a very safe chain of custody to the point where it arrives in the lab and it is tested, and then we can be certain that the results are indeed from that individual. So the chain of custody is extremely important.
So I'm actually going to speak on that point because I actually had a friend who was on going to pain management because he had some problems, and he went to take a piss test, and they actually said that another drug was in his system. And I actually know that this guy did not take drugs because I lived with the person, I worked with the person, I was always around that person. So what she's saying here can be messed up, but very unlikely. But I know for a fact that he actually got fired from the pain management because they said that there was another drug in his system. And I know for a fact I could actually 100% say that the guy was not on drugs. Anyways, let's continue.
Important. From one of the articles, scholarly articles, that I really find almost as a touch point, I want to make a quote, and I'm actually going to read it right now from something I wrote from this article, and that is, quote, "A submerged vehicle containing a body or bodies should be transported in its entirety to the medical examiner's office for in situ exam of the body and the vehicle to provide clues." Okay, so I'm throwing out concepts and ideas to you all, and I'm going to have you all go back to look at the documentation. But the question would be, I'm just going to ask the question, I'm sure you all know the answer, was Kiley's body removed from the vehicle and taken alone to the ME's office, or was the vehicle removed in the position that it was found. So in other words, it was found on its sort of on its roof. Was it removed from the water like that, not flipped, so as not to juggle the body or the location of the body or any evidence that might have spilled?
But didn't AWP say that the cops flipped the vehicle over? That's what everybody's saying. So the vehicle was actually flipped. But I think what she's talking about here was the body actually in the vehicle when the body was flipped. And whenever they was pulling out the vehicle, they actually said that there was another station, another YouTuber that actually done the video on about her bringing out the vehicle, and she was actually a crimes forensic. She done autopsies, and she actually said the body would have to remain inside the vehicle because if they was to distract the body out of the vehicle, they have to take pictures all the way from the beginning to the body getting out of that vehicle, which is a timing process, and they'd have to have a tent set up. They did have a tent actually set up at the crime scene. So let's go on further and see what she has to say.
Spilled out, but that it was appropriately removed, not flipped, and taken to the medical examiner's office en masse, we say. E-N, mass, M-A-S-S-E, together. And that is important because if there was, for instance, any form of tethering of a body or even a seatbelt that may have inadvertently or purposefully been placed over, in this case, Kiley, and pulled out of the tailgate and then the tailgate shut to hold her in place, we need to know that. And so hopefully photographs were taken very carefully of her position, anything inside, by law enforcement prior to them ever even moving the car. And then hopefully not moving the car from its found position, protecting all windows if they were broken out, etc., in order to prevent any loss of evidence, etc. And then once the car has come out, to move, before opening a tailgate, etc., to move en masse the body with the car. And then for the investigators to be able to, again, chain of custody, step by step.
So basically she's saying they gotta go down by chain of command at that point. And another thing too is a lot of us actually was talking about the seatbelt ordeal. It's funny that she brought up the seatbelt ordeal. Some of us said that she was actually bound in by the seatbelt in the back because it was sticking out the back. And a lot of other people said that that seatbelt could actually get stretched out and it can just be shut in the back of a hatch, which I have shut seatbelts in a door back of a hatch because they've been stretched out so much. It's just funny that she brought that up. Anyways, let's continue.
With excellent documentation and communication, note how prior to opening the tailgate, prior to moving the car out of its found position, how was the body found? This is very important. And I will say no more on that. Now, there is another statement that I just found very compelling in one of these articles.
So basically, she was done talking about that situation, which makes me believe that maybe she knows something more, or maybe she has a thought just like we do of, well, something about the seatbelt being used to do something with Kiley Rodni's body. That's what that seemed like to me, but let me know in the comments what you guys think. Anyways, let's continue.
Articles that I read, and I think it's something that no matter what sort of place we are in life, whether we work in law enforcement, medicine, a restaurant, you're a teacher, you're a homemaker, basically this statement said in this article, and again I'll link this, that especially when looking at the potential for a drowning victim, it is paramount for in all agencies to coordinate one with the other, to communicate one with the other, because especially if concerned about a drowning versus a drowning suicide versus a homicide, and then somebody was dumped, so to speak, in a body of water, every single aspect of the case needs to be communicated in a very transparent fashion amongst agencies, so that when the autopsy report or any of the investigative documents are published, they are published in a very cogent, easy to read, but complete manner. So I wanted to bring that to the fore. Now,
and you can tell that this woman's a doctor, guys. This woman deals with patients every single day, deals with watching autopsies, deals with patients that's actually OD'd. That's what she does. That's what she said in part 1. She is a doctor. She works in emergency rooms. She does everything throughout the hospital that a doctor actually does. Helps with surgeries, emergency surgeries, anything a doctor would do. But you can tell by words that she is startled by what she has actually found herself looking into Kiley Rodni's situation, her death being an accidental drowning death. And she has spoken that, well, Kiley Rodni's death did not look like a drowning, that they said it was a drowning because it was hard to find out what else was actually happened to Kiley Rodni. You see, what's really weird as well is they actually used all the money up searching for her body. But then again, we had cops that actually comb the water and divers that comb the water, and Kiley Rodni's vehicle was not found. But yet, the vehicle was actually seen from drones. And they say the water actually went down at the point of the drone seeing Kiley Rodni's vehicle. But now we have her actually coming forward and actually talking to us about the seatbelt. How they removed the vehicle, what they should have done when they did remove the vehicle. Was the vehicle flipped with Kiley Rodni's body inside of it? They said that they actually found a shoe that was off of Kiley Rodni. That was the only part of her clothes that was actually off of Kiley Rodni, was a shoe. Guys, this makes no sense, and we have a doctor coming forward. Is this going to change anything? Anyways, let's continue.
The final thing in this 10-minute that I want to talk about are twofold. One is, how do we identify a deceased body, okay, in general? And it is very different in a way when a body has been submerged for a length of time in water. And we're going to talk about the specifics of that in my next episode, which I think will come in a day or two. So the quintessential identifying method since the early 1900s is fingerprinting. And this was actually developed by the New York City Police Department. And soon thereafter, in the early 1900s, the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the FBI also embraced the concept that is your benchmark, that is best practices, fingerprinting. But obviously we know that unless you've been fingerprinted because you are required by your job, like for me, I'm fingerprinted throughout the years because of the type of work that I do, or if you've been arrested.
And how would you go actually about fingerprinting Kiley Rodni being submerged for the time being she was actually submerged? And that's the reason why they do tissue tests and they keep tissue. I don't know how long they actually keep the tissue, but I do know they keep the tissue in case something else was to come up. So fingerprinting, to that subject, some of us are fingerprinted as a kid. So we've been in actually the system since a kid. And actually, I think that's a lot of what they should do is actually, well, fingerprint at birth, which they do because the handprints. So they could actually use that stuff to go back to look at that stuff to figure out, well, your fingerprints. And that's what she's touching on this time. That's what she actually touched on last time, too. But I go back to the same thing about why they didn't drug test Kiley Rodni for fentanyl, shrooms, and so on and so forth. It makes absolutely no sense. Knowing that there was a fentanyl outbreak in this basically the same, well, community that she lives in. Doesn't make no sense. Anyways, I know I keep saying that and I will continue to say that. Let's continue.
If a person wants to adopt a child domestically or internationally, their fingerprints are required. So there are reasons that fingerprints are on record, right? But if a person like Kiley, let's say, was 16, never arrested, how can we know what her fingerprints are? So the ideal identifying method is fingerprinting. That aside, the next method is dental records. And I think dental records absolutely is a great method. We know that. And I'm going to give the example that in the Brian Laundrie case, fortunately, with great, we say in Spanish, anticipación, or with forethinking, the law enforcement knew that they were looking for maybe his body or him, but they went ahead and even before he was found, Brian Laundrie's dental records and dental x-rays were present. They had it in hand. So they could immediately use those, take x-rays of his, whatever was left of his mandible and his maxilla and the teeth, and do a comparison. And that is why they were so quickly able to turn around and so transparently say to the public, we had his records from his dentist, we've done a comparison, this is a definitely an identifier. And he has been clearly identified, or positively identified, as we say. Another method is DNA. So blood, hair, skin, and bone marrow. And actually a newer way in the past probably decade is to actually get into the dentum of the teeth. So in other words, below your enamel, you have the dentum, and they can get and extract DNA from there. So that if there isn't a lot of anything left, other than, let's say, skeletal remains or your teeth, there's still a way to obtain DNA, and it has to be mitochondrial DNA. And then they use that DNA post-mortem, after death DNA, from the dentum, which is below the enamel of the teeth, from bone marrow, etc. And they have a comparison, hopefully, from the toothbrush and or hairbrush of the person in question.
So there is all kinds of way they can actually identify a body. She goes on to say that. But I done a video on a guy who is it was a 50-year-old cold case. He actually stabbed a woman, I do believe 60 times. It was in Hawaii. And they just actually got the DNA. They kept the DNA for 50 years. And then they actually went and done a test because it was never closed. The case was never closed. So they kept on trying to find the person. And they actually ran a DNA test finally with the new stuff that we have, and actually closed a 50-year-old cold case and caught the guy who actually murdered the woman. And the guy who actually murdered the woman lived 10 minutes down the road from where the woman lived. And he was actually in city council in Hawaii that actually murdered the woman. So guys, if we have DNA, if we can get that DNA in the right hands, is what she's saying, then stuff could be solved. No problem with that DNA. DNA does not lie. Anyways, let's continue.
And by using pre-death or pre-mortem sample from somebody's toothbrush or hairbrush, they make a comparison, mitochondrial DNA comparison, with the DNA found in those areas of the body that we have discussed. I have gone well over the 15 minutes, and my mother would not be happy, but I will just finish up by saying that those positive identifying methods, i.e. DNA, well, first of all, as we know, the fingerprinting, the DNA, and the dental, not necessarily in that order, but those three are sort of the only ways that we can really positively identify a victim. There are presumptive ways, and those would include, if the body is not too decomposed, having the family identify, if they're willing and able, to identify the body. However, we know from history, and not too far away history in the past, that there have been misidentifications, even by parents of their child, their deceased child. They've misidentified, and it wasn't their child. So that using a family member to identify is considered presumptive, and it certainly is not a 100% guarantee. In addition, we can use presumptive identifiers like the age, race, sex, or some physical characteristics of the victim. Markers, we say. Markers like tattoos, markers like jewelry or piercings. So those can be used as presumptive identifiers.
Or they get also, what she's saying about the jewelry is, like, if there's pictures of them actually wearing jewelry before, they can say, yes, that's her jewelry, that's what she used. And even the parents at that time could actually say that yes, that's actually her jewelry on her. But we all know that somebody could actually switch the jewelry and put it on somebody else, and somebody else wear it and never get a picture taken, and then identify the wrong body. That has happened before as well. So, with that further said, guys, let's continue.
And finally, circumstantial identifiers. In the case of Kiley Rodni, she was missing. Her car was missing. The car was found. One body was found in the car. Okay, most likely that represents Kiley Rodni. And then you say, well, can you utilize any clothing that she was last wearing, jewelry, tattoos, etc.? All of that can be used to make a presumptive diagnosis. Not a definitive diagnosis, but a presumptive diagnosis. We'll talk more about that in part 3. How was diagnosis, or identification, I should say, of Kiley Rodni actually made? Were photographs taken from below water to the point where the car was taken from water, and obviously autopsy, during autopsy photographs? And how was that done, and was their chain of custody maintained? Thank you for listening to all.
Anyways, guys, there you have it. Kiley Rodni autopsy, accidental drowning, part 2. She is coming out with a part 3, and I will get that to you guys as well. Guys, look, this whole case is weird, and I've said before, why didn't they go check the trash that was from the party? If people's drinking their slobber maybe on the can, they could actually distract that stuff and find out actually who was drinking out of that can. Hairbrushes. You know, we found Kiley Rodni's hairbrush actually in, well, we didn't, but Check It TV found Kiley Rodni's hairbrush in the water. Came out of the water. You guys, this whole thing's weird. I'm going to get out of here, guys. I love you guys. Anyways, salute to Creek Squad, RedRebel Nation. Love you guys. YouTube family, I love you guys too. But first, love yourself, like yourself, be nothing but yourself. Like, subscribe to the channel. It's highly appreciated. Guys, go check out the channel. Go check out the merch store. All you got to do is just go to community post, click the link. It'll take you to the store. And there's RedRebel Nation merch on there. Anyways, salute to you guys. Love you guys. I've said that. I'm out of here. Your boy Deuce is out. Thank you, guys.